Greetings, friends. Love and pain in the family often go hand in hand. Today, I will tell you a story about people who learned to distinguish one from the other. Vera woke up when a ray of sunshine, piercing through the carelessly drawn curtains, hit her directly in the face, as if intentionally seeking her out in the morning disorder of the bed. She lay there, listening to the sounds of the apartment. The old refrigerator in the kitchen buzzed monotonously. Somewhere in the bathroom, water was dripping, and beyond the wall, the neighbors had already turned on the TV to the morning news. Her hand reached mechanically toward the other half of the bed. Feeling the cold sheet, she realized that Oleg, as usual, had woken up earlier without waking her. Although she had asked him several times to do so, because she hated waking up alone in the empty apartment, where every creak of the floor resonated with an unsettling echo in her heart. Getting out of bed, Vera approached the window and pulled back the curtains, letting the bright May light into the room, which made her squint. In the courtyard, young mothers were already walking with strollers. On the bench sat old women with sunflower seeds, discussing the latest news from the neighborhood, and children were running around the old sandbox, raising clouds of dust. Vera sighed, remembering how she and Oleg once dreamed of moving into their own house with a garden, where their children could run on grass, not asphalt. But 20 years had passed, and they still lived in this 3-room apartment on the 4th floor of a typical 9-story building, where the elevator worked off and on, and the neighbors upstairs regularly did renovations, shaking the entire building. In the kitchen, she found a note stuck with a magnet to the refrigerator. Left for a meeting with partners. Returning at lunch. Don't forget to call Marina regarding Saturday. Oh. Vera crumpled the paper, throwing it into the trash bin with such force as if it were to blame for all her morning disappointments. Marina, his younger sister, eternally begging for attention, always entering their lives with her problems and advice that no one had asked for. Saturday, that meant the family lunch, which Oleg had invented to organize once a month, gathering all the relatives in their apartment, turning it into a thoroughfare where Vera had to smile, set the table, and listen to her mother-in-law's snide remarks about how the borscht isn't hearty enough and the pies are too dry. Vera poured herself coffee from the pot Oleg had left on the stove and sat at the table, looking at her once graceful hands with long fingers. Now they had become knotted, with prominent veins and rough skin from constant housework. She was 42 years old, but sometimes it seemed to her that she had lived all 60. That was how tired and empty she felt in the mornings. Oleg, at his 45 years, looked younger, regular workouts at the gym, expensive haircuts, suits he bought without looking at the price, saying that appearance is important for business. And she had long since stopped taking care of herself as meticulously as before, when every meeting of theirs was a small performance where she played the role of the irresistible woman, and he that of the knight in love. The phone on the table vibrated, displaying Marina's name. Vera looked at the screen for a few seconds, thinking about whether to answer, but finally slid her finger across the screen, accepting the call. "Vera! Hi!" Marina's lively voice was heard, the kind that always made you want to cringe. It sounded so artificial and cheerful. "Have you already planned everything for Saturday? I wanted to let you know that we will arrive earlier, around 11 o'clock, because Maxim has to leave around 5. He has an important meeting." "Marina, lunch at our place is at 2 o'clock, Vera replied, trying to control the irritation in her voice. "If you come at 11, I won't have even started cooking yet." "Well, start earlier," Marina threw out carelessly, as if it were a trivial request. "We'll chat while you make magic in the kitchen. By the way, Mom asked you to make her favorite liver salad. You remember? The one you prepared for New Year's?" Vera closed her eyes, counting to 10 in her mind so as not to explode. Her mother-in-law, Lydia Petrovna, always found a way to imply that she wasn't good enough for her precious son. Every compliment was poisoned. "Good job, Verutza. Almost as tasty as I make it. You try so hard to keep the house clean. Although, of course, in my time, we managed without all these modern solutions." "Fine," Vera said with a strangled voice. "I'll make that salad." "Excellent," Marina rejoiced. "See you Saturday then. Kisses." Vera put the phone on the table and buried her face in her palms, feeling the familiar wave of helplessness and anger washing over her. Saturday was turning into a real trial, where she would not only have to feed a crowd of relatives, but also endure their evaluating gazes, remarks, and advice. And Oleg, as always, would sit in the living room, discussing politics or business with his father, leaving her alone to deal with the female part of the family. She got up from the table and headed to the bathroom, where, looking at her reflection in the mirror, she tried to find traces of that girl she was 20 years ago. Back then, she believed that Oleg's love would be a fortress protecting her from all troubles, that their marriage would become an island of happiness in the grey ocean of everyday life. But the years showed that love isn't a magic wand, but hard work, where she always pulled more weight than he did. In the evening, when Oleg returned home, Vera had already made the shopping list for Saturday's lunch, calculating the approximate cost of all the products. He entered the apartment with a bouquet of roses, which immediately alerted her. Oleg had long since stopped giving flowers, simply because, without a reason. "This is for you," he said, smiling, handing her the bouquet. "I simply wanted to make my beloved wife happy." Vera took the flowers, inhaling their scent, but instead of joy, she felt a strange anxiety, as if those roses were not a gift, but a ransom for something she didn't know about yet. Oleg went into the living room, took off his jacket, hung it on the back of the chair, and turned on the TV, immersing himself in the world of news, where economic problems and political scandals were being discussed. "Your sister called," Vera said, putting the roses in a vase. "They will arrive at 11 o'clock on Saturday, and your mother wants liver salad." "Good." Oleg nodded distractedly, without taking his eyes off the screen. "You'll manage. You're a master." This phrase, "you'll manage," Vera had heard so often that she began to perceive it as a sentence. She always managed everything that fell on her shoulders, but no one ever asked her if she wanted to manage, if she had the strength, if she wasn't tired of this endless marathon where the finish line kept moving further and further away. Saturday arrived with that implacability with which all unpleasant but inevitable events come, like a visit to the dentist or a discussion with the boss about an unpaid bonus. Vera woke up at 6 in the morning, although she could have slept about 3 more hours, but her body, accustomed to the regime of self-sacrifice, no longer knew how to rest when a day demanding the total mobilization of all forces lay ahead. Oleg was still sleeping, sprawled on the bed as if it belonged only to him, and Vera was just a temporary guest, allocated a narrow strip of space right at the edge. In the kitchen, she started cooking. She methodically cut vegetables for salads, boiled the liver, which emitted a specific smell that made her grimace. The knife in her hand moved mechanically, almost hypnotically, and Vera caught herself thinking that her entire life had come to resemble this monotonous action. Cutting, boiling, frying, cleaning, cutting again, boiling, frying, cleaning, and so on in a circle, day after day, year after year. Once she had dreamed of becoming an interior designer, she had even enrolled in courses, but then their son, Artyom, was born, and all dreams were postponed for later, which never came because then new circumstances appeared, new reasons to give up on herself for the sake of the family. "Mom, why did you wake up so early?" The sleepy voice of Artyom was heard, appearing in the kitchen doorway in a wrinkled T-shirt. He was 19 years old. He was studying in his second year at the technical university, and every time Vera looked at him, she tried to understand when her little boy had turned into this tall young man, slightly slouching, with a budding moustache and an eternally dissatisfied expression. "Today is the lunch. Did you forget?" asked Vera, without stopping the chopping. "Your grandmother, Aunt Marina, and Uncle Maxim are coming." "Oh, no," groaned Artyom, holding his head. "I wanted to go to Dima's. We were going to test a new game." "Artyom, it's a family lunch. Your father insisted that everyone be present," Vera said wearily, feeling irritation beginning to leak through her forced calm. The previous evening, Oleg had mentioned in passing that Marina might possibly bring her friend, Christina, whom she had met recently at some personal development courses. Vera hadn't given it importance then, being too busy with the shopping list and calculating products. Now, however, remembering this, she felt a slight anxiety. An extra person meant extra worries, the need to maintain polite conversation with a stranger, to simulate hospitality when she just wanted to lie down and not get up. The guests began to arrive close to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. First, as always, Marina and Maxim appeared, and with them a tall and supple woman of about 35 years, in an elegant beige dress, with an impeccable hairstyle and makeup that looked so natural It seemed she wasn't wearing makeup at all, though Vera, having some experience in these matters, understood how much time and money were necessary to create such an effect of slight negligence. "Vera, meet Christina." Marina introduced her with pride, as if she had brought a celebrity into the house. "We met at training. She's such an amazing person, a psychologist, a coach, in general. An incredibly interesting personality." Christina extended a hand with an expensive manicure, smiling so that cute wrinkles appeared at the corners of her eyes. "Nice to meet you, Vera. Marina has told me so much about you," she said in a low, velvety voice, from which, for some unknown reason, Vera felt sick. Vera shook the extended hand, noting the coldness and smoothness of the skin, and smiled in response, although inside, everything tightened with an unclear anxiety. There was something predatory in Christina, hidden under the exterior gloss and charm, something that instinctively made one cautious. Oleg, hearing voices in the hallway, came out of the living room, and Vera couldn't help but notice how his face changed when he saw Christina. Something flashed in his eyes, amazement, recognition, but it was so fast that she could have been mistaken. "Oleg, this is Christina, Marina's friend," Maxim introduced him, patting his brother-in-law on the shoulder. "Hope you don't mind that we brought a guest." "Of course not. We are happy to have guests," Oleg replied. And Vera caught a strange intonation in his voice, a certain tension, as if he were reciting a text learned by heart. Lunch began with the usual bustle. Vera brought the dishes, everyone sat down, complimented her cooking, and it seemed everything was going according to the established script. Lydia Petrovna and Pyotr Ivanovitch arrived a little later. The mother-in-law, as usual, found something to nitpick about, but Vera had already learned to let these remarks pass by her ears, concentrating on everyone being fed and satisfied. Christina sat next to Marina, handling the cutlery elegantly, maintained the conversation, told amusing stories from her practice as a psychologist, and everyone listened with interest. Vera noticed that Oleg was listening too, even more attentively than usual, and a few times their gazes intersected across the table, short momentary touches of eyes, after which both looked away a little faster than they should have. After the main courses, when everyone had relaxed and eaten, Marina proposed going out on the balcony. The day had turned out sunny, and it would have been foolish not to take advantage of the good weather. Most of the guests moved there, taking tea and pies that Lydia Petrovna had brought. Vera remained to clear the table, refusing Christina's offer to help, saying she would manage alone. She was gathering dirty dishes, putting plates in the sink, when suddenly she noticed that Oleg was neither on the balcony nor in the living room. Vera frowned, wiped her hands on a towel, and went out into the hallway. Artyom was in his room with headphones on, so the muffled voices she heard walking further down the hall weren't coming from him. The bedroom door was ajar, and from there came Oleg's male voice, and a light, melodious, intimate female laugh. Vera froze, feeling her heart start to beat faster. She took a step closer, straining her ears, and made out the words. "I can't believe you're here," Oleg was saying, and in his voice was such tenderness, which Vera hadn't heard for many years. "When Marina said she would bring a friend, I didn't think it would be you." "I didn't expect it either," Christina replied, and in her voice sounded something similar to a mixture of joy and regret. "I thought you had been married for a long time, that you had forgotten." "Forget?" Oleg interrupted her. "How could I forget? You know what happened then? I couldn't." Vera heard a rustle, as if someone approached the door, and instinctively retreated into the shadows, pressing her back against the hallway wall. Her legs wouldn't obey her, her knees trembled, and fragments of thoughts passed through her head, refusing to link into a coherent image. "Oleg, you have a family," Christina continued, and now her voice sounded more serious. "I don't intend to destroy your marriage. I simply saw you and couldn't help myself. I wanted to talk privately." "Christina, Oleg's voice trembled, and Vera distinguished in it something that gave her the impulse to scream, to hit, to destroy everything around. "I've thought about you all these years. Sometimes it seemed to me that if things had settled differently back then, but they didn't," Christina said softly. "You chose Vera." This name, spoken by that woman's lips, sounded like a slap. Vera covered her mouth with her hand so as not to make a sound, feeling tears flowing down her cheeks. She stood in the hallway of her own apartment, eavesdropping on her husband, confessing to another woman that he had thought about her all these years, that he regretted the choice made. The ground was slipping from under her feet, the world was turning upside down, and Vera understood with frightening clarity. She had never been the first. In all these 20 years she had been the second. She had been a replacement. She was the one chosen not out of love, but out of circumstance. Vera didn't remember how she got to the bathroom. She only remembered that her legs carried her on their own, away from that door behind which her whole life was collapsing, all the illusions, all the hopes she had maintained with such diligence in recent years. She locked the door, turned on the water in the sink to cover the sound of sobbing, and buried her face in a towel, biting the fabric so as not to scream out loud. 20 years. 20 years she had lived with a man who loved another. 20 years she had given him all her youth, health, dreams, herself. And he, all this time, remembered the one who got away, dreamed of the one with whom he was not destined to be. Vera looked at her reflection in the mirror, red and swollen eyes, runny mascara, face distorted by suffering, and didn't recognize herself. No, she recognized herself too well. Here she is, the real Vera, without the mask of the patient wife, without the fake smile, without the acted calm. Simply a woman betrayed in the vilest way, not through an infidelity of the body, but through an infidelity of the soul, an infidelity stretched over 2 decades. Someone knocked on the bathroom door. "Vera, are you in there?" Marina's voice was heard. "Is everything all right with you?" Vera inhaled spasmodically, wiped her face, washed off the remnants of mascara with cold water, forcing herself to breathe evenly, deeply, as she had once learned in yoga classes she abandoned after the second session because Oleg needed a clean shirt by morning and the washing machine had broken. "Yes, everything is normal," she replied, and her voice sounded surprisingly firm. "I'm coming out now." "Are you sure? Should I help you with cleaning?" "No need, I'll manage." She heard footsteps moving away and looked at herself again in the mirror. Her face still betrayed recent tears, but she could blame that on fatigue, a headache, or anything else. Vera straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and opened the door, returning to the reality where she had to smile, pour tea, and pretend that the world hadn't just collapsed in a blink. On the balcony, everyone was sitting discussing something animatedly. Christina had returned to Marina, elegantly holding the teacup. Her face expressed a calm interest in the conversation. Oleg stood near the railing, looking somewhere into the distance, and Vera noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he clutched a cigarette in his hand, although he had quit smoking 3 years ago. Their eyes met for a moment, and he averted his eyes first, dragging on the cigarette so deeply as if trying to inhale oblivion into himself. "Vera, come join us," shouted Lydia Petrovna, patting the empty chair next to her. "Christina is telling such interesting things about relationship psychology." Vera sat down, feeling every muscle in her body protest against the necessity of being here, among these people, in this false atmosphere of family comfort. Christina smiled at her, and in this smile there was nothing hostile, only gentleness, understanding, and a certain sadness, which made everything even worse, because it would have been easier to hate an obvious rival than this woman who, it seems, was also suffering because of the situation. "We were just talking about the fact that," Christina continued, addressing everyone, but Vera felt the words were intended specifically for her. "Many couples live together for years, but don't truly know each other. People are afraid to talk about their true feelings, about the past, about what worries them, and this silence gradually destroys the relationship from the inside, like rust destroys iron. But in my time it wasn't customary like that, with the soul on a platter," remarked Lydia Petrovna, shaking her head. "We lived, we worked, we raised children, and it was fine. Families were sturdy." "Sturdy on the outside," Christina contradicted gently. "But on the inside? How many women of your generation lived their lives in silent despair, not daring to even admit their unhappiness to themselves?" Lydia Petrovna pursed her lips, evidently not expecting such an answer. And Pyotr Ivanovitch suddenly said quietly, "She's right. Lida, remember your sister, Anna. 40 years she lived with that man who didn't appreciate her, and after he died, she seemed to come alive. She started traveling, joined a circle. That's something completely different. The mother-in-law dismissed the idea, but uncertainty was heard in her voice. Vera was silent, clasping her hands together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Every word of Christina's hit the mark, as if she knew exactly what was happening now in her soul. Or maybe she really knew. Maybe Oleg told her everything in those few minutes in the bedroom, about how unhappy his wife looks, how tired she is, how for a long time there hasn't been real closeness between them. "Mom, is it true you wanted to be an actress?" Artyom asked unexpectedly, appearing on the balcony with a bottle of juice. Everyone turned to Vera. She looked at her son confused, not understanding where he got that from. "How do you know?" "I found some old photos when I was looking for the phone charger," Artyom shrugged. "You were there in a theatre costume, with makeup, and it says, after the show, the year 1997. Vera felt something tight in her throat. Yes, there was such a show. She played Catherine in The Storm in a student production. Oleg sat in the hall, looking at her with burning eyes, and afterward gave her a bouquet of roses and told her she was the most talented, the most beautiful, that he wanted to spend his whole life with her. And a year later she became pregnant, they got married, and the theatre had to be forgotten because the baby demanded non-stop attention, and Oleg worked from morning till night, building his career. "That was a long time ago," said Vera quietly. "In another life." "Why in another?" Marina wondered. "You could go back even now. There are amateur theatres, studios." "Vera doesn't have time for such nonsense," Oleg intervened, and a harshness was heard in his voice. "Family, home, these are more important." "More important than what?" asked Christina, looking directly at him. "More important than human happiness? More important than self-realization?" Oleg turned pale, clenched his jaw, threw the unfinished cigarette, and crushed it. "Excuse me, but you don't know our life, you don't know our circumstances," he said jerkily. "It's easy to give advice from the sidelines." "I'm not giving advice," replied Christina calmly. "I'm just asking questions worth thinking about." A tense pause ensued. Maxime, feeling the awkwardness of the moment, hurried to change the subject. "Well, what do you say? Maybe we have some more tea? Or is it already time for us to pack up? I have a call with partners in an hour." The farewell ritual began. Marina hugged Vera, saying something about what a great time they had. Maxime thanked her for lunch. Lydia Petrovna gave final recommendations about health and housekeeping. Christina approached last, extended her hand, and when Vera shook it, she squeezed her palm a little harder than necessary. She looked her in the eyes and said quietly, "You are stronger than you think. Remember that." Vera didn't get to answer Christina, whom Marina immediately pulled away, chattering about some plans for next week. The door closed. Silence settled in the apartment. Artyom disappeared into his room. Oleg went into the living room, turned on the TV. Vera stood in the hallway, looking at the closed door, and felt something new, unknown, frightening ripening inside. Not just resentment, not just pain. Something cold, hard like ice that has shackled a river. Determination. She went to the kitchen, poured herself water, drank it in one breath. Her hands were no longer trembling. There were no tears. There was only a clarity of thought that hadn't happened to her in many years. Vera took out her phone, found in old contacts the number of Svetlana, her college classmate, with whom she hadn't spoken for about 15 years. She typed a message. "Svetlana? Hi. Remember, you once said you have a design studio. Are you still hiring people?" The answer came almost instantly. "Vera, is that you? Of course I'm hiring. Let's talk tomorrow on the phone. We'll discuss everything. I'm so glad you wrote." Vera put the phone on the table and smiled. For the first time in many years, this smile was real. Sunday morning began with the fact that Oleg woke up earlier than usual and lay for a long time, looking at the ceiling. Vera felt his wakefulness. After so many years of living together, the body had learned to detect the smallest changes in breathing, in muscle tension, in the way he shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. She didn't let on that she wasn't sleeping, continuing to lie with her eyes closed. And every second of this silence was impregnated with something heavy, unspoken, like the air before a storm, when everything freezes in anticipation of the first thunder. "Vera," Oleg finally said, and his voice sounded hoarse, as if he hadn't slept all night. "Are you awake?" She could have pretended further, but what was the point? Both knew that an abyss had settled between them, and to pretend it didn't exist would simply be ridiculous. Vera opened her eyes, turned her head, meeting his gaze. In it could be read guilt, fear, and a certain fatality of a man who understands his secret has been discovered, but still hopes this can be avoided. "I'm not sleeping," she replied shortly. Oleg sat up on the bed, passed his hand over his face, rubbed his temples. Outside it was beginning to get light. The grey light of dawn penetrated through the slits of the curtains, colouring the room in dull shades, depriving everything of colour and life. Somewhere on the street, a crow cawed prolongedly, pitifully, and this sound seemed incredibly appropriate to Vera for the moment. "We need to talk," said Oleg, and this phrase sounded so banal that Vera barely held back a bitter smile. "About what?" she asked, getting up and pulling the blanket to her chest, as if it could protect her from what was coming. "Vera, He fell silent, searching for words, and an eternity fit into this pause. "I saw you standing yesterday in the hallway at the bedroom door." So he knew. He knew that she had heard. He knew, and yet he kept silent the rest of the evening, pretending nothing had happened. Vera felt a fury erupt inside, so vivid and burning that she wanted to scream, to throw something at him, to make him feel at least a shred of the pain she felt. "And what now?" she asked in an icy tone. "Do you want to give explanations? To say that it's not what I thought, that Christina's just an old acquaintance and there was nothing between you?" "There was nothing between us either," Oleg said quickly. But Vera interrupted him, not letting him continue. "It wasn't in a physical sense. Is that what you mean? But you loved her. You love her even now." Oleg turned pale, opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He simply stood, looking at her with an expression on his face, as if he had been caught doing something shameful. And now he didn't know how to get out of it, and Vera looked at him and thought about how she could have been so blind all these years. How could she not see that she was living with a man whose heart belonged to another? "I married you," Oleg finally got out. "I chose you. That means something." "You chose," repeated Vera, and in her voice sounded so much bitterness that Oleg flinched. "You chose me because I was convenient, because Christina left or rejected you. I don't know exactly, but I was there. I loved you. I was ready for anything, and you took advantage of that." "No, it's not like that," Oleg objected, but without much conviction. "I really wanted to build a family with you. You wanted to forget her," Vera finished for him. "And you decided that I'm suitable for this purpose. 20 years, Oleg. 20 years I was a replacement. What do you think? What is it like to realize that?" He was silent, looking at the floor, and Vera understood that she wouldn't receive any answer, because he has nothing to answer, because she is right, and he knows this, and his entire appearance tacitly acknowledges this, but out loud he cannot utter it, because then he will have to take responsibility for all these years of lies. "I spoke with Svetlana yesterday," said Vera, changing the subject, and her voice became official, almost indifferent. "Do you remember my college classmate? She offered me a job in her design studio. I start next week." Oleg raised his head, staring at her with bewilderment. "Work? What are you talking about? You don't have designer studies. You haven't worked for 20 years. How will you?" "I will take courses," Vera interrupted him. "Svetlana is ready to teach me directly in the process. At first I will be helpful, then gradually I will start taking my own projects. She believes in me more than you ever believed." "Vera, this is madness." Oleg shook his head. "You are 42 years old. What work? You have a home, family, Artyom." "Artyom is 19 years old. He is an adult," said Vera firmly. "And the home and family, that is now not just my responsibility. You also know how to turn on the washing machine and make dinner. Or have you forgotten how it's done?" Oleg got up from the bed, began to walk around the room, and Vera could see how he was trying to gather his thoughts, to find arguments that would make her give up this idea. But what could he say? That she must remain a housewife while he builds his career and dreams of another woman? That her place is at the stove, and his desires and ambitions are more important? "You're doing this out of revenge," he said finally, stopping and looking at her accusingly. "You want to punish me for what you heard yesterday?" "I'm doing this for me," replied Vera, getting out of bed and putting on her robe. For the first time in 20 years, I am doing something exclusively for myself, and not because I have to, because it's right, because others expect it from me. And you know what, Oleg? I don't care if you like it or not." She left the bedroom, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, and headed to the kitchen. Her hands were trembling when she poured water into the kettle, put it on the stove, took out a cup. Her whole body vibrated with tension, with fear of the unknown, with the realization that she had just taken the first step towards something new, frightening and attractive at the same time. Artyom came out of his room, yawning and stretching. "Mom, what do we have for breakfast?" he asked, opening the refrigerator. "Make it yourself," said Vera, and her son turned around, looking at her with amazement. "Seriously?" "Absolutely," nodded Vera, pouring boiling water into cups. "You are 19 years old, Artyom. It's time to learn to take care of yourself. The eggs are in the fridge, bread in the box, pan in the cupboard. I'm sure you will manage." Artyom opened his mouth, obviously wanting to protest, but meeting his mother's gaze, he changed his mind. Something in her face said it was useless to argue. He shrugged, took out the eggs, and began clumsily cracking them into a bowl, spilling half on the table. Oleg appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, already dressed, gathered, with the usual mask of confidence on his face, which he put on every time he had to hide his true feelings. "I'm leaving for the office," he announced. "I have to sort out documents for the new project." "On Sunday?" Artyom wondered, stirring the omelette in the pan. "Business doesn't wait," Oleg threw out shortly, avoiding looking at Vera. She nodded silently, taking a sip of tea, and didn't ask what kind of business specifically required his presence at the office on a day off. It was possible there really was business, or maybe he was simply running away from home, where he could no longer pretend everything was fine. And let him run. Vera no longer intended to hold a man who was never truly present. When the door closed behind Oleg, Artyom approached his mother, placing the plate with the unevenly fried omelette in front of her. "Mom, did you fight?" he asked quietly. Vera looked at her son, tall, adult, but still so young, in his misunderstanding of the complexity of human relationships. She wanted to protect him, to tell him everything is fine, that his parents are just a little tired. But wasn't that what she had done all her life? Lied, hid, pretended for the sake of preserving the illusion of well-being? "Yes," she answered honestly. We fought seriously. And it is possible that our relationship with Dad will never be the same again." Artyom nodded, looking down, and Vera saw his lips tremble. "I kind of understood that things weren't right with you guys," he admitted. "I just didn't want to think about it." Vera hugged her son, pressing his head to her shoulder, and in that moment she felt she was making the right choice. Right not only for herself, but also for Artyom, who needs to see that Mom isn't a silent victim of circumstances, but a living person, capable of fighting for her happiness. Monday arrived with alarming speed, as if time, sensing the changes in Vera's life, decided to accelerate its race, leaving her no possibility to change her mind or back down. She woke up at 6 in the morning, although the meeting with Svetlana was scheduled only at 10 o'clock, but sleep had disappeared somewhere, leaving in its place a nervous agitation mixed with fear. Oleg was sleeping on the sofa in the living room. He had moved there alone last night, reasoning that he had to work late, but both understood that this was just a convenient lie, covering their inability to be near each other after that Sunday discussion. Vera stood for a long time in front of the closet, flipping through things and realizing with sadness that a large part of her wardrobe was composed of house robes, faded T-shirts, and shapeless jeans in which she had taken care of the household for years. The only somewhat decent dress, a dark blue one, bought 3 years ago for a corporate party of Oleg's, hung in the far corner, slightly wrinkled, with a small stain on the sleeve she hadn't managed to get completely out. She took it out, ironed it, put it on, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman trying to look dignified, but betraying herself through an uncertain gaze and slumped shoulders. In the kitchen, Artyom was already sitting with a cup of coffee, browsing something on his phone. He looked up, measured his mother with an evaluating gaze, and nodded approvingly. "You look good, Mom. Where are you headed?" "To a meeting," replied Vera, pouring herself coffee, and noticed her hand trembling, causing the liquid to spill. "Remember I told you about a job?" "Oh, yeah." Artyom put the phone down. "You seriously decided to work? I mean, it's not just talk?" Absolutely serious, confirmed Vera, sitting opposite her son. Artyom, I understand it's unusual for you. That much will change, but I need this. I need to feel that I mean something, not just within these walls. Artyom nodded, and Vera saw something new in his eyes. Not a childish misunderstanding, but an adult acceptance, as if he had suddenly matured by a few years in a single night. I understand, Mom. And you know what? I'm proud of you. Seriously. These words warmed her more than any approval she could have heard from Oleg. Vera reached across the table, squeezing her son's palm, and smiled for the first time in these days. She smiled truly, without bitterness and pain. Svetlana's studio was located in an old brick building in the center, where there had once been a fabric factory, and now there were workshops for artists, designers, and photographers. Vera climbed the creaking wooden staircase to the 3rd floor, inhaling the smell of paint, wood, and something else that couldn't be defined, but which spoke of creation and the life bubbling behind these worn doors. Svetlana welcomed her with warm, sincere hugs, from which Vera almost teared up, because she didn't remember the last time she was hugged like that, as if she were precious for who she is, not because she was someone's wife or mother. "Vera, you've hardly changed," exclaimed Svetlana, pulling away and looking at her with a smile. "Maybe just became a little more serious. Come in, let me show you everything." The studio represented a large open space with high ceilings, huge windows through which daylight poured in, and walls full of sketches, fabric samples, and interior photographs. At the tables worked 3 young people, bent over tablets and maquettes, without paying attention to the newcomers, completely absorbed in their projects. "This is our team," Svetlana introduced them. "Misha, Ekaterina, and Denis. Guys, this is Vera, my old friend. She will be working with us." Everyone raised their heads, said hello, measuring Vera with curious glances, and returned to work. Vera felt something tighten inside out of fear. She was the oldest here, the most inexperienced, the one who knows and can do nothing. What's she actually looking for here? "Don't be afraid." As if reading her thoughts, Svetlana said, seating her at a free table near the window. "Everyone was a beginner once. Ekaterina came 3 years ago, without the slightest idea about design, and now she leads large projects. The main thing is the desire to learn." Svetlana took out a folder with some materials and opened it in front of Vera. "Let me tell you what we will start with. In the first period, you will help me with current projects, choosing materials, drawing up estimates, communicating with suppliers. In parallel, you will take online courses on the basics of design. I will send you the links, and in 2 months, when you get used to it, you will try to take your first small project under my guidance. How does the plan sound to you?" Vera nodded, listening, and a single thought spun in her mind. She's actually doing this. She's sitting in a design studio. She's being offered a job. She's being given the chance to become something more than just a housewife. It was simultaneously frightening and incredibly inspiring. "Svetlana, but will I be able to handle it?" she asked quietly. "I'm 42 years old. For 20 years I haven't done anything other than house and family." Svetlana took her hand and looked her directly in the eyes. "Vera, do you remember how we did the dormitory project in our 3rd year? I thought up the concept, and you created the visualization, and it turned out so beautifully that the professor showed your work as an example for 2 weeks. You have talent, you simply forgot about it, but I remember and I believe in you." These words were like a balm on wounds. Vera felt something inside thaw, something frozen for a long time beginning to move, trying to remember what it is like to believe in oneself. They worked until evening. Svetlana showed her current projects, explained nuances, and familiarized her with the computer programs used in the work. Vera's head was spinning from the volume of information. Her hands were getting tired from the unusual work, with the mouse and keyboard, but she caught herself smiling, feeling an enthusiasm, awakening inside that she hadn't felt for many years. When she returned home in the evening, the apartment greeted her with silence. Oleg was not there. On the table was a note that he would be late at work. Artyom was sitting with headphones on, absorbed in his computer. Vera went to the kitchen, saw the unwashed dishes in the sink, the crumbs on the table, the empty pan on the stove. Before, this would have provoked irritation, a desire to clean everything up immediately, to tidy up. But now she simply walked past, poured herself water, sat on the sofa, and closed her eyes. Let the dishes stay. Let the crumbs lie on the table. Today, she did something for herself, and that was more important than a perfectly clean kitchen. Tomorrow she would go to the studio again, she would learn, she would work, she would become the one she wanted to be once long ago. And no one, not Oleg, not his family, not her own fears, would make her turn back. 3 weeks passed from the moment Vera started working in Svetlana's studio. And in this time, her life changed so much that she no longer recognized herself. In the morning, she woke up not to prepare breakfast for her husband, but to get to the meeting at 9 o'clock where new projects were discussed. In the evening, she returned tired, but with eyes shining, full of impressions and ideas she wanted to share. But she had no one to share with. Oleg was late at work more and more often, or went somewhere in the evening, citing meetings with partners. Artyom was immersed in his student life. The apartment gradually acquired an unkempt appearance. The dust on the shelves, which Vera used to wipe every day, now stayed for weeks. The dishes were washed irregularly. Laundry was done when clean clothes ran out. Lydia Petrovna, who stopped by on a Wednesday without announcing herself, clutched her heart seeing the disorder in the kitchen and made a real scene, accusing Vera of destroying the family through her selfish whims. "Look at you!" shouted the mother-in-law, waving her hands and pointing at the unwashed plates. "Your husband has no time to eat normally. Your son walks around in wrinkled shirts, and where are you? You're playing designer at your 40-something years. It's shameful, Vera. Shameful." Vera stood leaning against the doorframe and remained silent, looking at her furious mother-in-law with an amazing calm. Before, such accusations would have provoked a feeling of guilt, made her justify herself, run and fix the situation. Now, however, she just listened and thought about how strange it is that for Lydia Petrovna, dirty dishes are more important than her daughter-in-law's happiness. Order in the house is above human dignity. "Lydia Petrovna," Vera finally spoke when her mother-in-law had lost her breath. "Oleg is an adult man. He knows how to cook for himself. Artyom is also an adult. He can wash his shirt, and I have the right to work if I want. And no one, not even you, will force me to give that up." Lydia Petrovna turned red, opened her mouth, but couldn't find an answer. She grabbed her bag, threw out something about ingratitude and the ruined generation, and left the apartment, slamming the door loudly. Vera closed her eyes, leaning her head against the wall, and did not feel relief, but a heaviness. The heaviness of the fact that she is forced to fight for the right to be herself, that even this simple desire to work and develop is perceived as a betrayal of family values. In the evening of the same day, Oleg returned home earlier than usual. Vera was sitting at her laptop in the kitchen, working on sketches for the project of a small apartment, which Svetlana had entrusted to her. She was so absorbed in work that she didn't immediately notice his appearance. When she raised her head, she saw that he was standing in the doorway, looking at her with a strange expression, a mixture of confusion, resentment, and something else she couldn't define. "Mom called," he said, taking off his jacket and putting it on the back of the chair. "She told me about your conversation." "And so?" asked Vera, closing the laptop and looking at her husband. "And you think I should leave work and return to the life from before?" Oleg went to the fridge, took out a bottle of water, drank almost half in one breath before answering. "I don't know what to think, honestly," he admitted, sitting opposite. "On one hand, I understand that you have the right to your life. On the other hand, Vera, I feel like we are falling apart, that there is nothing left between us." "But was there?" asked Vera quietly, and this question hung suspended in the air, heavy and inevitable. "Was there ever anything real between us, Oleg? Or have I lived all this time with a man who was thinking about another woman?" Oleg looked down, passed his hand over his face. In the light of the kitchen lamp, he seemed older than his years, tired, lost, broken. "I tried," he said so quietly that Vera barely heard him. "I tried to love you as you deserve. But feelings, you cannot command them to appear. I thought that, with time, everything would come by itself, that I would forget Christina, that our life together would be sufficient. And perhaps it would have been sufficient if I hadn't met her again." Vera felt her heart clench with pain, but it was already a different pain, not sharp like that day at the family lunch, but dull, nagging, like from an old wound that will never completely heal. "You are seeing her," she uttered. And it wasn't a question, but a statement. Oleg nodded without raising his gaze. "Yes, we meet, we talk, we try to understand if we have any chance at something more. Vera, I didn't want to lie to you, but I also didn't know how to tell the truth. And the truth is," spoke Vera slowly, feeling the words settle in a straight line, "that our marriage ended. Not now, but a long time ago. Maybe it never truly began." "What do you mean?" Oleg raised his head, and a shadow of fear passed through his eyes. "I want a divorce," said Vera, and was surprised at how calm her voice sounded. "I will not live with a man who loves another woman. I will not pretend that everything is fine, for the sake of maintaining the appearance of a family. Artyom is already an adult. He will get over this, and we will free each other from this torment." Oleg sat silently, looking at her, and Vera saw different emotions passing over his face: relief, guilt, fear of the unknown. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said hoarsely. "Probably it is the only honest way out, but Vera, forgive me for all these years, for using you, for not being able to become the husband you deserved." "I forgive you," answered Vera, standing up from the table. "But that doesn't mean I will forget, and that doesn't mean I will ever understand how it was possible to behave so cruelly with a person who loved you with all her heart." She left the kitchen, leaving him to sit in solitude, and went to the bedroom. There she lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 weeks she allowed herself to cry. Not from pain, not from resentment, but from relief, because finally everything had been said out loud, because the lie had ended, because ahead was a new life, frightening and uncertain, but honest. And in this honesty there was something liberating, something that gave her hope that, one day, the pain would disappear, and in its place, something bright and true would appear. The divorce turned out to be a long and exhausting process, transforming people who once lived under the same roof into strangers sharing assets, memories, and the remnants of what was once called a family. Oleg moved out 1 week after their discussion, rented a one-room apartment at the other end of the city, taking with him only the bare necessities: clothes, documents, his laptop. The rest he left to Vera, as if trying to atone for his guilt, though both understood that furniture and appliances cannot compensate for 20 years of lost life. Artyom went through the divorce with difficulty, though he tried not to show it. Vera saw how he struggled between parents, how he avoided discussions on this topic, how he shut himself in his room, turning the music up louder so as not to hear the silence of the emptied apartment. One evening, he came into the kitchen, where Vera was sitting with a tea, looking out the window at the city falling asleep, and sat opposite, turning the cup in his hands for a long time, in silence. "Mom, is it because of me that you dragged it out for so long?" he asked without raising his eyes. "Because you were afraid of how I would react?" Vera looked at her son, and her heart clenched with tenderness for this big boy, who still considered himself the center of his parents' universe. "No, Artyom," she answered gently. "I dragged it out because I was afraid to remain alone. I was afraid to admit to myself that I was living with a man who didn't love me. They were my fears, not your fault." "But don't you have regrets?" asked Artyom, finally raising his eyes. "That you lost so many years with Dad?" Vera fell into thought, trying to find an honest answer to this question she had been asking herself every night for the last few weeks. "I regret it," she admitted, "but not all the years, because without those years you wouldn't exist, and that's the only thing I definitely do not regret." Artyom nodded, and Vera saw his eyes glisten with tears. He was trying his best to control. She reached across the table, covering his palm with hers, and they sat like that for a long time, without uttering a word, but understanding each other better than ever. Work at the studio became a salvation for Vera. The only place where the divorce didn't matter, where she was valued not as someone's wife or mother, but as a specialist, albeit still inexperienced, but diligent and talented. Svetlana entrusted her with her first independent project, a small apartment for a young couple with a limited budget. Vera worked on it day and night, thinking through every detail, choosing materials, creating visualizations on the computer, which she had learned to use with amazing speed. "Vera, good job," said Svetlana, examining the finished project. "It is truly good work. The clients will be delighted. You have a natural sense of space and color. These words warmed her soul, more than all the compliments Vera had heard in the last 20 years, because they were compliments for her work, for her talent, for what she created with her hands and mind, and not for how tasty she cooked the borscht, or how well she ironed shirts. Lydia Petrovna stopped calling after that scandal, but Marina continued to periodically get in touch, and in her messages, an undisguised curiosity mixed with judgment could be felt. Once she wrote a long message about how Vera acted selfishly, destroying the family, how Oleg is suffering, how Christina, apparently, is not guilty at all, because love cannot be controlled by reason. Vera read this message, smiled ironically, and deleted it without replying. She no longer intended to justify herself to people who saw in her only a function, not a living being. If Marina wanted to believe that Vera was guilty of everything, let her believe. It didn't matter anymore. On a Friday evening, when Vera was returning from the studio, she met neighbor Aunt Valentina on the stairs, an elderly woman who lived one floor below and always knew all the news from the courtyard. "Vera, my dear," the neighbor stopped her. "I heard that you and Oleg are divorcing? Oh, what a pity. It was such a good family." "It was," agreed Vera, without going into details. "But aren't you afraid to remain alone?" asked Aunt Valentina with compassion. "At your age, you won't find a new husband. Excuse my bluntness. And alone, it will be rather sad." Vera looked at the neighbor and suddenly began to laugh sincerely, from the soul. "You know, Aunt Valentina, I lived for 20 years in a marriage and felt alone. And now, I am indeed alone. But I don't feel loneliness, because finally I have myself, and that, however strange it may be, is enough." The neighbor shook her head, clearly not understanding the logic, and walked on, murmuring something about modern women. And Vera went up to the apartment where her son was waiting, where sketches of the new project were scattered on the table, where the fridge was practically empty, but in her soul there was peace and light. Half a year passed from the day Vera started a new life, and autumn, arriving with the first cold rains and yellowed leaves, found her a completely different person. She had lost a few kilograms, not from a diet, but simply because she moved more, no longer ate her stress with sweets, and stopped cooking huge pots of borscht which she then finished alone. She cut her hair shorter, dyed it a lighter shade, bought a few new clothes in a style that before seemed too bold, and when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a tired housewife, but a woman with shining eyes and a confident posture. Svetlana's studio was blooming, and Vera was already leading 3 projects simultaneously, handling them so well that Svetlana proposed a partnership, a small share of the business, in exchange for additional responsibility and the investment of her own funds. Vera accepted, although this meant she would have to take out a loan, sell a few pieces of jewelry left from her mother, and risk the little she had. But risk no longer scared her. She had learned to live with uncertainty, moreover, to find enthusiasm and opportunities in it. Oleg called sometimes, especially for issues related to Artyom or the division of property, and his voice sounded distant, polite, as if they weren't ex-spouses who lived together for 20 years, but distant acquaintances brought together by chance. Once he mentioned that he now lives with Christina, that they planned to get married. Vera listened, thanked him for the information, and hung up, experiencing nothing but a slight sadness. Not for Oleg, but for the years that went into the void. On an October evening, when Vera was returning from the studio, a male voice called out to her on the street. She turned and saw Maxim, Marina's husband, standing at the entrance to the neighboring cafe, holding an umbrella and smiling slightly awkwardly. "Vera, hello," he said, approaching. "I saw you by chance and thought, maybe have a coffee. If you're not in a hurry, of course." Vera hesitated for a second, but then nodded. She was curious what brought Maxim here, to her neighborhood, far from their usual places. They entered the cafe, ordered coffee, and Maxim was silent for a long time, stirring sugar in his cup and evidently searching for words. "I wanted to talk to you," he started finally, raising his eyes. "About what happened, about your divorce from Oleg. Vera, I consider that Marina was not right when she accused you. I even told her that." "And how did she react?" asked Vera with slight irony. "She made a scene," admitted Maxim with a crooked smile. "She said, 'I am a traitor, that I am taking your side against the family. But, you know, In general, I have thought a lot lately about marriage, about what it means to be together. And I understood that Marina wants from me the same thing Oleg received from you, to provide a living, to be silent, not to hinder her from living as she wants. And my opinion, my desires all are secondary. Vera looked closely at Maxim, truly analyzing him for the first time. Before he seemed to her just an appendage to Marina, a successful husband who always agreed with his wife and didn't have his own face. Now, however, she saw a tired man, who also lived in a cage woven from others' expectations. "Do you want a divorce?" she asked him directly. Maxim sighed, rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. Maybe. I'm afraid, to be honest. I'm 47 years old. I got used to a certain lifestyle, to the fact that there is a house, a wife, stability. But on the other hand, when I saw how you changed in these months, it's like you became younger and came to life. I thought, maybe I should try too." "Maxim, I can't give you advice," spoke Vera slowly. "Everyone must decide for themselves what is more important to them, comfort or honesty with oneself. I chose honesty, and yes, sometimes I'm afraid. I wake up at night and think, but what if everything collapses? If I won't cope, if I remain alone and needed by no one? But then I get up in the morning, go to work, do what I like, and understand. I am truly living. For the first time in many years, I am truly living." Maxim nodded, finished his coffee. "Thank you for listening to me. And forgive me for Marina, for this whole family. They don't understand what they did to you." "I no longer need their understanding," smiled Vera. "I am free from the necessity to please people who, from the start, didn't want to see me as I am." They parted at the cafe, and Vera walked towards home, thinking about that discussion. Maxim was right about one thing. She had changed, and these changes were not just external. Something happened inside, a transformation that turned her from a victim of circumstances into the mistress of her own fate. At home, Artyom was sitting in the kitchen with a girl Vera was seeing for the first time. Slender, with short hair and intelligent eyes. She smiled shyly when Artyom introduced her. "Mom, this is Alisa. We study together. I wanted to introduce her to you for a long time, but somehow it wasn't the right moment." Vera extended her hand to the girl, shaking her warm palm. "Nice to meet you, Alisa. I'm glad my son finally introduced me to his girlfriend." Alisa blushed, and Artyom smiled contentedly. They drank tea in the kitchen, talked about various things, about college, future plans, movies they had seen. Vera listened to their young voices, observed how Artyom looks at Alisa, how he carefully pours her tea, how he gets animated telling about something, and understood. Here is the result of her choice. Her son saw that his mother can be strong, that a woman is not obliged to sacrifice herself for the sake of the family, that you can love and at the same time remain yourself. And, probably, his relationship with Alisa will be different, more equal, more honest. When the girl left, Artyom approached his mother and hugged her. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly. "For what?" wondered Vera. "For showing me how one should live," he answered simply. Winter came suddenly, rushing upon the city with a snowfall that covered the streets in a single night, transforming the grey and gloomy world into a snow-white fairy tale, where everything seemed cleaner, brighter, newer. Vera stood at the studio window, looking at the falling flakes, and thought about how much had happened in this year. A year that began with betrayal and pain, and was ending with hope and the feeling that life is just beginning, despite her 43 years. The divorce had been definitively finalized 1 week ago. Vera received the documents by mail, flipped through them with a distant curiosity, signed when needed, and put them in a folder, experiencing neither relief nor bitterness. Simply the noting of a fact. The marriage of 20 years ended, and that is normal. It is a part of life that moves on, without asking for permission. "Vera, the client has arrived for the presentation," Svetlana called her from the next room. "Your project, with the 2-room apartment." "Coming?" Vera nodded, gathering the tablet with visualizations, and went to the meeting room. A young couple sat there, she pregnant, with a rounded belly. He nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses. Vera began the presentation, showing every detail of the project, explaining why she chose exactly these colors, these materials, how she organized the space so that even in a small apartment, there would be a child's room, a living room, and a workspace. The couple listened with bated breath, and then the girl began to cry, not from sadness, but from happiness that such a thing is possible when a dream suddenly takes on visible contours. "It is perfect," she sighed, wiping her tears. "It is exactly what I imagined, only better. Thank you, enormously." Vera felt a warm feeling of satisfaction, blooming inside. Not pride, but specifically satisfaction, that she could make some people a little happier, help them create a home where they will raise their child. It was a completely different sensation from when she cooked lunch for Oleg's family, striving to please everyone and receiving no gratitude. Here she created, fashioned, and was valued for it. In the evening, returning home, Vera entered the store to buy groceries. At the entrance stood Lydia Petrovna with full bags, and their gazes met. The mother-in-law froze, obviously debating whether to walk past or speak, and Vera, surprising herself, greeted her first. "Good day, Lydia Petrovna." "Vera," nodded the mother-in-law, and in her voice there wasn't the usual coldness, but rather a certain confusion. "How are you?" "Good," answered Vera. "I work, I live. And you?" Lydia Petrovna was silent, then said unexpectedly, "Oleg lives now with that woman, Christina. I saw them together last week. He looks, I don't know, different somehow. Maybe happier." "I am happy for him," said Vera sincerely. And it wasn't a lie. She truly bore no grudge against Oleg. The anger and resentment had consumed themselves in these months, leaving behind only the understanding of the fact that both had been unhappy. But she found the strength in herself to change the situation, and he did not, and now everyone received what they deserved. Lydia Petrovna nodded, picked up the heavier bag. "You know, Vera, I have rethought a lot in this time. Maybe I wasn't right regarding you, regarding how a wife must be. You did what I didn't have the courage to do, when you left, when you understood you could no longer live like that. And you, it seems, do not regret it." "I don't regret it," confirmed Vera. "Although it was frightening, very frightening." "Courage doesn't mean not being afraid," remarked Lydia Petrovna, unexpectedly philosophically, "but doing what is necessary, despite the fear. Forgive me, if anything. I wish you happiness, for real." They parted, and Vera watched her mother-in-law go, feeling something similar to a reconciliation, not with Lydia Petrovna specifically, but with the past in general, which no longer held her prisoner in its demands and reproaches. At home, Artyom greeted her with news. "Mum, I decided that after university I will move out, rent an apartment with Elisa. We are dating seriously, and I want to try living together." Vera sat on the sofa, digesting the information. Her son was maturing, leaving for his own life, and soon she would remain completely alone in this 3-room apartment. Before, this thought would have provoked panic, a feeling of emptiness and uselessness. Now, however, she felt a strange anticipation. She will have time for herself. The freedom to do what she wants with the space, the possibility to finally arrange her house as she likes it, not others. "I'm happy for you, son," she said, hugging Artyom. "Just promise me that you will behave with Elisa as an equal, that her dreams will be as important to you as yours, that you will not force her to sacrifice herself for the sake of your comfort." "Mom, I learned from your example," answered Artyom seriously. "I will never be like Dad, I promise." In the evening, Vera was sitting at the computer, working on a new project, when a message came from an unknown number. She opened it and saw, "Hello, Vera, it's Christina. I know it's weird, but I would like to meet with you, to talk, if you are not against it, of course." Vera looked at the screen for a long time, deliberating. Part of her didn't want the meeting, didn't want to see the woman because of whom her marriage collapsed. Although, if she were to be honest, the marriage collapsed on its own. Christina was just the catalyst. Another part was curious what she wants to say. To apologize? To justify herself? Vera wrote the answer. "Okay, where and when?" They met in 2 days in the same cafe where Vera had spoken with Maxime. Christina had come first, was sitting by the window, nervously crumpling a napkin. When Vera approached, she stood up, extending her hand, and Vera shook it, sitting opposite. "Thank you for accepting," began Christina. "I understand how this looks, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to explain. No, not explain. I wanted you to know the truth. Oleg and I were dating before he met you. We loved each other, but I left for studies and we broke up. When I returned, he was already married. To you. And I resigned myself. I lived in. And then Marina brought me to that lunch, and everything erupted again. Why are you telling me this? Asked Vera calmly. Because I want you to know. You were not guilty of anything. Oleg loved me, yes, but that doesn't mean there was something wrong with you. Simply that's how things settled. And I'm sorry that you suffered because of our feelings. Vera looked at Christina. A beautiful, smart woman, unhappy in her own way, who had also been a prisoner of circumstances, just of different ones. I don't bear a grudge, said Vera. More than that, I'm grateful to you. If it hadn't been for that meeting, maybe I would have lived on in illusions. But this way, I woke up, I started to live truly. And you know something? I am happier now than I was in all these 20 years of marriage. Christina smiled sadly, but with relief. You're strong. I admire you. They talked a little more, and when Vera was leaving, she felt that the last chapter of her past life had closed definitively. Ahead was a new book, white pages that she will fill herself with her dreams, with her achievements, with her love for herself.